So first things first, we happen to have a Microsoft flow that is capturing anything on Twitter that has the hashtag BTJPA demo. So if we pick up on those items, what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to take them, and the next step of the flow is actually going to insert those into an Azure SQL database. So this database I have pre-provisioned. It's got a couple different columns in there, knew what the data types were. Essentially, we're going to capture, hey, it's coming from Twitter, who's the user, and what was the actual message that was sent into there. We then take what is in that SQL database, and I created an Azure web app, so essentially a website running in Azure, and I use Entity Framework, which is a way to kind of model things based on a database. And I said, hey, give me a model for this Azure SQL database and be able to actually display that directly inside of my web app. We then said, hey, well, let's take that exact same Entity Framework model and let's actually go ahead and create an Azure API app. And the nice part here is that, guess what? We can add Swagger to that Azure API app. And once I deploy that out to Azure, I have a way to say, hey, let's go make some REST calls against this basically Azure database and be able to create, read, update, delete records inside of there. And because it's got that Swagger version of the API out there, I can also take that exact same Entity Framework model plus the Swagger and create my Swagger JSON document and go ahead and create a PowerApps custom API. So that custom API then we can use inside of a new PowerApps app and actually display it directly inside of my mobile, my laptop, my tablet kind of application. And you're kind of seeing this whole life cycle here of things coming from external. I've got social media, basically Flow pulling that data into a database. Database is then the kind of record or source for a web app, for an API app, and the API app then becomes a custom API and pull it directly into PowerApps again. So kind of a whole life cycle here of things that are available to us. Again, that maybe not things that you've worked with before, but that you can kind of dive into and get some more functionality out of as you dive into it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the whole life cycle here. Let's pull up Visual Studio first. So all of this code is going to be available on GitHub. We'll send the link out later on, but I want to show you here, I've got a simple database project, and inside of here I've got one simple script, and it's going to create this little table here called Instagram files. I've got a file name, created by, and content, in case there's any kind of picture content out there. I've published this up to Azure SQL, and then up here is my API app. And what I've done is generated a model, again we said in Entity Framework. So this database model, here we go, is going to be basically that. Again, same the file name, created by, and content. I have also generated a API controller from that Entity Framework model. So what you can see in here is, hey, guess what? I've got this URL for API/BTJPA demo social hits. I've got a get Instagram files. I've got same thing, get Instagram file with a single ID on here. I've got a put for doing the exact same kind of thing for an update. I've got a post, and I've also got a delete on here. So different APIs are being generated off of this individual component here. I also wanted to show you inside that swaggerconfig.cs. This was added by that swashbuckle NuGet package. If I scroll down, there you go. There's that enable Swagger UI. This will let me actually test out my API in the browser and be able to work with that as necessary. So let's jump over to our browser then. Here is my API running up in the cloud. So you can see in here, I can go ahead and take a look at my API endpoints. I've got some for get, post, get, put, and delete. Again, they line up with everything we just saw inside of Visual Studio. If I go in, let's actually take a look at this get down here. This is going to be the response essential schema. So what's it going to look like once I bring this back? Again, same kind of input-output things we saw from the API. Take a look at the try it out. So I can actually try this inside of my browser. And if everything worked properly, I should be able to see all the test data. This is my stuff that I put in there last night. As well as, there we go. Here's some data coming from you guys live during this session. So as you can see, all this information was being picked up by Flow, put into the database, and being pulled out directly in real time here. So now I should be able to go over to my website. This is just my sample MVC web app, nothing special about this. I've got a custom link on here. This will bring me over to my data model essentially. And once this pulls up, I should see the exact same data we just saw there. And there you go. My 2 sample ones, as well as everybody else who was popping in new entries into there. And now, for the kind of cream of the cake, let's jump over to PowerApps, and I want to take a look at my connections. So I've already gone through these steps ahead of time, but just kind of show you where this is all at. So this down here, this new test connection, that is my custom API that I generated based on the API app. But what I essentially did was, inside of my Swagger UI kind of demo here, if you look up top in the middle, this URL right here, if we pop this over into a new tab, this is the JSON Swagger document. There we go. So essentially I saved this off. This is all the information of how does this actually look under the covers for Swagger. I saved this off into a file. I then went into PowerApps and said I've got a new connection. I got a custom connection. I'm going to go up here and say new custom API. I'll provide it with a name, and I'll upload that Swagger API definition, give it an icon if I want to, a description, and so forth. So we've already done all the steps. What I would then do is, let's pull up our PowerApps Studio. I'm going to say, let's create a new app. Let's go ahead and create it from blank, and we'll say a phone layout. And what I want to do is, let's go ahead and link over to one of my data sources. I'm going to say add a data source. And one of my options should be that new test connection. So let's scroll down here, there it is. And there we go, there's that same kind of namespace we saw before, BTJ PowerApps API app. So now I should be able to insert a new gallery onto the page. I want to choose just simple vertical with text, nothing special about this. And I'll edit this and say, hey, for the items of this, rather than being this image gallery sample, let's use BTJ, and there you go, that's my data source. So I want to call that exact same one I just did in the browser, that BTJ PA demo social hits Instagram files. And you'll see that the method signature for this, no parameters required. Go ahead and close that off. And it's a little bit hard to see, but there are some little dots up top telling me, hey, yes, I've got some data coming back. Now, as I look into this field, again, is not exactly what I want it to be. I don't want created. Instead, let's do the created by. And then down here for the next one, actually, let's flip this. Let's do this for created. Let's say file name. That's the actual text. And the last one will be the created by. And there you go. If I play this, there are my test ones that I did the prior night. And here's all the data coming from you guys. Again, completing that cycle. We went from flow into a database, into a web application, into an API app, into a custom flow or custom API, and into PowerApps itself. Thus completing kind of the whole cycle here.